Thank you, Tyler, and welcome everybody. I'm very excited to be on this call today with you all. As Tyler said, my name is Dwayne Brejak. I have been with NASW for a little over 5 years now. It's flown by. But one of the things that I have encountered pretty much throughout my tenure at NASW is talking to social workers at all levels about how do we connect with one another, with other professionals, how do we find resources and share resources within our field, and networking, I feel, is a big piece of that. And so today's webinar, we're going to talk about what does it mean to network, what are some of the tips and tools that you all can use in your practice, whether you're a clinician or community organizer or kind of all the above, which many of us social workers are. And how can we best utilize our time as a very busy professional to make those connections throughout our career. So what I hope to do today is talk about a few things. Like I said, discussing the importance of building relationships, which is a key tenet of our field in general. Explore both in-person and electronic modes of networking. So we're going to talk about social media, conferences, other in-person events, those things that you hopefully have started to do. Many of you might be very experienced networkers. Some of you might be just starting out your career. So we'll kind of run the whole gamut of that. Discuss some of the ethical considerations. As you all know, that the NASW Code of Ethics has recently been revised, and as of January 1, those revisions will take place and be impacting social workers. Actually, later today, the national office is doing a webinar on those changes. So if you get a chance, make sure you listen in on that. I know they'll have it available online as well if you can't make the live broadcast. And then lastly, I just hope that we'll talk about some practical tools that will enhance your skills. I have a few opportunities. I want this to be as interactive as possible. I know it's not so easy on sometimes on an online platform, but I have a couple polls, as well as I want you to ask any questions or provide any examples of good sort of things that you have worked with within your practice throughout today's workshop. So I'd like the first poll to be brought up. We'll give folks a minute or so to answer this question, but this will be, how do you feel when you see the word networking?
So we got about 75, 80% of the votes in here. Looks like about 42% say, I love it, I'm ready to meet new people. About 40% say, if I have to. 6%, I'm too busy for that. And 13%, I would, but I rarely know what to say.
All right, so it sounds like half of you are the extroverts and half of you are the introverts. Perfect. All right, so that's good. How I feel about network personally is it's something very taxing for me. I feel like I'm more introverted, definitely, but I know it's a very integral part of what we have to do. And so for me, when I have to network, it's very helpful to know that I have some downtime afterward to process, and then I kind of understand what I'm getting into. Sounds like a good chunk of you are always ready to meet new people, that you have some strategies to go in when you see a full packed conference, that you're just ready to go to any table and then start shaking hands. That's wonderful. And we know that social workers, well, first, why do we should we care about networking in general in our field? So on the more practical side, for those of you who might be looking for jobs or maybe moving within an agency up the ladder, almost all jobs are now filled through networking, not through online platforms or job fairs. It's all about who we know. And I would estimate that in social work, it's probably even a slightly higher percentage than that. I know for most social workers, when I talk to them and they say, or when I ask them, where did you hear about your job? It's from a colleague or a coworker or a former student or a professor. We know that now that 80% of new jobs are filled internally or because of networks. So the agencies are really starting to look at who do we already have on staff, who knows that basic framework of what we do, who fits within our company structure or our agency structure, who has good working relationships with folks who are already here, and we want to move those folks up the ladder. Now, one of the challenges we're going to be seeing with that over the next decade or so is we know that there is an aging workforce nationally. And in social work, we're even slightly higher than the average. So we expect in the next 10 years or so there to be a fairly large number of folks who are transitioning out of management roles and retiring. So how are we prepared to fill those management roles, those supervision roles, those executive director roles, and are we building the culture within our agencies to get people up those ladders for success? The other problem we see is that Generation X does not have enough folks to fill the baby boomers positions that will be leaving. So we also know that millennials will be likely taking over a lot of those positions and moving up the executive chain quicker than in previous generations. And so one of the conversations we've been having here at NASW and here specifically in Michigan is how are we training our agencies to be prepared for that workforce? You know, do we have regular networking opportunities within our company, so that internal networking piece where folks are getting to know each other, building those networks and resources, but are we also helping folks build the emotional skills that they'll need to be able to move up those ladders? We know that social workers, our field is growing faster than almost any other. You know, we're growing 15% between now and 2016, and I don't anticipate that's going to slow down anytime soon, with the baby boomers going to be needing more services. And as we become a more global society, social workers are going to become a more and more prominent role. And then the other factor of, I think, why we need to care about this is we are becoming a very global society. Every day, technology is increasing our capacity to make connections across the world. You know, when the last time the Code of Ethics was revised, people weren't thinking about Facebook and LinkedIn connections and Twitter chats and how are we creating avatar therapy or emoji languages. All of these things have really strong positives in the ability for us to connect and make new networks, but it also presents a lot of challenges for us as professionals. But social workers, we're always up to any challenge. That's one of our strengths. We have a lot of the skills that I think are very innate when we talk about building connections. So, you know, those listening and empathy skills, data collection. You know, you may not think of network and automatically put data collection, but I think that's a big piece of it too. It's we're doing our research about who we're talking with, what we need, who might need these resources, or who can I share this person with who is going to value from this relationship. That information gathering, cooperation building. You know, we are trained to be adept at networking. However, I think too infrequently we seek it out for our own professional purposes. And even within, I think, our educational system in social work, networking is not seen as a really important factor, where if you look at like a business school or a law school, networking is the go-to thing. You have to do that if you want to get an internship, if you want to move up the chain, and you have networking classes, you have people that are brought in, and it's have that time out to really build those skills to talk professionally. So there are some opportunities to really, I think, strengthen our field in terms of building networks within our own community. So when I talk about networking, what do I mean? So personally, when I think about networking, I think of it as simply the active process of trying to enhance your professional toolbox. So how do we seek out new connections with some sort of specific goal in mind? We typically don't go into a networking event, maybe a regional networking event or a conference saying, I just want to meet some new people. You know, you might, so that might be that social aspect of your goal, but usually I want to find somebody who is working on a human trafficking task course because I'm really passionate about this and I would like to find a way to get involved. Or I'm interested in starting a private practice, but I don't really know the ins and outs. Who can I find who I know is working in this field, who's willing to maybe be a mentor or a supervisor? So whatever sort of situation you might be going into, think about what is that goal. Are you looking for a mentor? Maybe you're looking for a training of some sort, or you're looking to maybe bring a speaker in. I can't tell you how many conferences that I've been into that I've come back to NASW here in Michigan and say, I found us a speaker, or we need to bring in this person because they were amazing. And I think we can really enhance some of our agencies when we do that too, and utilize the skill set of those folks who are out in the field doing lots of different things. And traditionally with networking, I think we often think of job search, and that's a big piece of networking is finding a job. And a lot of the platforms online for networking, like LinkedIn, for instance, are all about career advancement and development. But what I want you all to take away when you are thinking about our conversation today is it's okay for networking to be a small, slow, progressive process. It's not don't expect immediate results. You may meet one person here, one person there, and we may not always get something immediately out of a relationship, but by slowly building your professional network, you're going to be able to have a whole range of folks that you can call on at any time for whatever your issue may be. And don't often, the other thing is we don't always assume that social work is going to be your network. I know for us, for me personally, a lot of the work that I do is also around legislative advocacy. So building connections with legislators, other coalitions and advocacy organizations, that's going to be a really strong thing where they may not have social workers on staff or be social workers themselves. What they do and the resources and people that they have connections with can really benefit the work that we're doing on our level. So I want you to think of networking in three types: external networking, internal networking, and community and organizational networking. I think external is what we traditionally think of as networking. I'm going to go to an event. I'm going to meet a whole bunch of new people. I'm going to have some business cards handed out. That's what I'm doing. External networking is absolutely some of that, but building new relationships outside of your daily bubble. So not who I work with, but maybe a second connection. Where internal networking is connecting with those inside your work, your job, maybe you're volunteering somewhere within those immediate circles, maybe your family even. And what we see in the field of social work is, especially for new professionals and students, that internal networking is very important because you don't usually need continuing education yet. You may be getting your footing set about what your professional identity is. So how can I work within my agency to really make strong connections, to learn from people, to better my skill set? And then we see as folks kind of progress within the field of social work, external networking really starts to really starts to flourish, maybe 5 to 10 years after folks are in the field. And when we're thinking about the culture of your agencies and where you work, some of the things is that you want to think back and maybe take back to where you work is, what sort of processes do we have for our staff to get to know one another? Does my agency pay for me to attend conferences? All of those things that can help you professionally. Sometimes it's built into our agency culture and sometimes it's not. And a lot of times when you're working in a non-traditional social work setting, we really have to do a lot of advocacy, self-advocacy around those sort of particular benefits. The last sort of networking I want to talk about is community and organizational. So how does your agency network outside of themselves? So building coalitions, maybe you're bringing in another agency to partner on a project. That's a way that you'll probably, once you do that, and whether it's social media or in person, that can filter down into your staff once you do the bigger organizational piece. But think of each of these types of networking as kind of that Kevin Bacon factor. So you've hopefully heard of that 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. So you may not know Kevin Bacon, but you may know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who then knows Kevin Bacon. It's the same sort of thing in social work. I can't tell you how many times that, I have been looking for a resource, say it's on ICD-10 codes. That's definitely not my area of expertise, but I can call up our chair of our private practice group and say, hey, Julie, do you have any resources on the ICD-10? And she may say, Dwayne, no, I have nothing, but here, I know this person who directly works with this, or they know somebody. So it's really important to build that. Even if you can get that outer tier started, it's going to help you get to that end goal of the resource that you need. So where do we start when we hear the word networking? Start on what you already know, who you already know. Everyone on the call today is a member of NASW. That's a really great first start to get networked. You're automatically connected to 125,000 people across the country. Now, we don't all see each other all the time, but there are a lot of opportunities to talk with social workers, whether it is in person at conferences, district events, online. NASW has a lot of different online platforms, from LinkedIn to social, Twitter to Facebook, and a lot of times you can share resources on those. Think about your school, wherever you did your BSW or MSW degree. Are you a part of that alumni association? I know I only have my job here at NASW because one of my friends in grad school said, hey, Dwayne, did you see this job opening? It's you. You need to take this job. And so I'm sure some of you are feeling that same way. You may have your current job because of a colleague from school. Internships, if you're a student, your internship is a really good way to start building that network. And then other sort of social work organizations and news outlets. Really good way to at least get that initial connection that is often free. And much of the professional world is not free. So when we can find resources that are either low cost or part of our association dues already, so groups like Social Work Today, Social Work Helper, CRISP, so if you're more on the policy side, Social Work, Social Care Media, those are groups that all have a fairly large social media presence that you can get connected with immediately to start getting news about the field, hear about events that might be of specific interest to you, and knowing kind of the resources within your own particular community. There might be a school of social work down the road. There might be a really large service provider, whether it's a VA or a hospital or a community mental health center. So you don't have to work there, but you may want to introduce yourself and say, I am Jane Adams. I'm working in the Pittsburgh area. I do home-based therapy for older adults around sexual health. If you need to contract somebody out, here's my information. Starting to at least just throw yourself out there if you have kind of that professional identity created. Now, there are a lot of different ways and venues to start meeting social workers and other professionals. I've talked about some of these already. Conferences and trainings are a really good one. I'll talk specifically about those in a minute. But volunteer opportunities. Many social workers volunteer outside of their job. And when I hear social workers say, I'm going to retire next year, I kind of always laugh a little bit because I don't think I've ever met a social worker who's actually retired. They're doing something on the side. Usually it's volunteering or staying connected or doing supervision or mentoring. That's a really good way to network yourself, but also train kind of the next generation on how do you build those connections within your field. Work groups and task forces, boards of directors, and that can be on a volunteer level, at the organizational level, or the association level. NASW at the state chapter level has boards of director positions, as well as at the national level. So that's a good way to kind of really have an input about what you want your profession to be, what you want your organizations to look like, as well as to network with folks who usually are in a different part of the state, maybe a different practice area or specialty area, and who have some different kind of skill sets and life experiences. And thinking about networking, you know, some of the non-traditional networking can lead to some of the biggest successes. You know, I think political events we don't often think of as networking opportunities, but they absolutely can be. And I know social workers have been slightly more engaged in politics in the last year or so than I've seen in quite a while. But for instance, at one of the political events in this fall, we had 3 social workers speak, and it's at one of the women's marches, as well as interpret sign language. And you know, we were there as an organization as NASW, and one of the other speakers that was there was training women to run for office across the country. And so just by making sure that we were at that event, it gave us a really good connection that we then followed up with and said, hey, we met you at the Women's March. We understand that this is the sort of training that you offer. We'd love to figure out how we can partner with you to get more social workers specifically trained to run for office. So NASW here in Michigan now has a partnership with that organization's called Emerge to train social workers across the state to run for office. And we hope to build that into a long-term coalition so we can really change the scope of how our services are provided, the funding that we get, the laws and policies from the local, state, and federal kind of are impacting us. And then hobbies and special interest groups. You know, this could be, like I said, private practice groups. There are a lot of groups on different topic areas for social workers. I know the national NASW, they call them specialty practice areas, but depending on your particular skill set and passion area, there is always a group somewhere that is working on that. And so finding those best ways to fit within either existing organizations, or if you find that there's not something around an issue that you're passionate about, creating that and building those connections. We have members all the time call us and say, hey, do we have a group on human-animal bond? You know, I'm interested in bringing horses into my practice. How do I do that ethically? What sort of things do I need to think about liability-wise? And so, you know, 2 years ago, I would have said, you know, we don't have a group like that, but we'd love to get one started. Would you be interested in helping chair or co-chairing? And do you know any other folks who we could reach out to that might be interested in helping getting the word out about this? And for example, that's one particular group that now we have about 70 people in, folks who are interested in integrating. Just start out with that initial reach to say, hey, I'm interested in this. I don't know if there's any resources out there for your associations. That's a really good first step to kind of get the ball rolling on this. And the more you put yourself out there, the more various opportunities tend to open. And sometimes opportunities you never would have thought would have been available or that you would have had any interest in. I'll give another example of when the first travel ban went through earlier this year, maybe January, or we had one of our members organize a rally at the Detroit airport, and she pulled that together in 24 hours and had, you know, 4,000 or 5,000 people show up. And because of that, she now has her own national radio show. It never was something that was on her radar. She just really wanted to community organize around a political issue. And so sometimes you will have these really strange and unique and sometimes really wonderful opportunities come out of just what you are doing out of your regular work, or maybe a passion that you have outside of social work. And if you are flexible and just want to get involved in something but don't know what, I absolutely say reach out to your associations or your organizational directors and say, you know, I would like to give back or step up in my leadership capacity. Do you know of any openings that are available? You know, at NASW, there are always leadership opportunities available at the state and national level. You know, your own board of directors rotate regularly, and they're always, I'm sure, looking to fill those spots. So some things to definitely do when you're out there networking, either in person, well, these ones are more in-person based. So first, you want to let people know that you're interested in networking or on the job market. That's the best way to get those folks to say, hey, Dwayne, I didn't know you were looking for a job. But now that I do, I will send you any these resources I find that I think would be a good fit for you. You know, we've heard about the elevator speech before. It's a good idea, even for social workers, to have at least a 30-second to a minute-long pitch about who you are, what your passion is, what you do in the social work field, if you have any particular skill sets that you want to share with folks. Um, you know, doing your homework. You know, if you're going to go to an event and you know who the speakers are, do a little bit of research on them, because if you know you want to go out and talk to them after their event, you don't want to just have it be an awkward start to a conversation, but you could say, you know, I read your book, or I saw that you're working on this sort of research. I'm really passionate about the foster care system. I'm wondering if I might be able to have, if you might be free for dinner, and we could chat a little bit more about I'm trying to get this bill passed, or I'm trying to develop resources on LGBT foster care youth. So, you know, doing that research can help you find those ties to folks who you might be interested in networking with. We all love Brene Brown and her daring greatly and being brave. You know, I think there's a lot of really important social work skills in a lot of what she says. But in terms of networking, how that comes into play, and definitely for me, you know, if I go into a giant conference hall of 300, 400, 500 people, and I don't know anyone, I'm usually feeling pretty nervous. And you know, making that initial jump to go out to a bunch of people that I'm not familiar with is not comfortable for me. But thinking about it as, okay, if I look around the room, there's probably at least a handful of other people who are feeling the same exact way and probably standing by themselves, looking around, wanting to make that initial conversation, or just wishing somebody would come up to them to talk to them. And so being brave and making that initial step forward, and maybe it's just going up to another person who's by themselves. It's like, hey, you know, I'm Dwayne. This is what I do. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Why are you here at this conference? Or, you know, what made you become a social worker? What I really think is important for a conference, though, is if you can bring a buddy with you. This is a surefire way to make sure that those awkward moments aren't there, at least for the majority of the time. Because what you can say is, hey, I'm going to bring my friend Stephanie with me, or I know she's going to be there. Stephanie, will you introduce me to somebody you know at this conference? I'd really like to expand my circle. I know you are connected really well in the profession. Would you be comfortable introducing me to 2 new people? And they may say, yeah, I'd love to do that. Do you know anybody here that I should be connected with? So knowing, at least having that buddy system is really good. But whatever you're going to be doing, making sure you have that follow-up is going to be really critical. So sending a quick thank you, saying, hey, it was really nice meeting at this conference. I appreciated our conversation around X, Y, and Z. I'd love to follow up. Do you have some time in the next couple of weeks that we could either set up a call or have a coffee? I also wanted to send you my LinkedIn profile so we can connect there professionally, especially if you aren't using your social media platforms that often specifically for professional networking. This is a really good way to start building that in, is every time you do a follow-up email saying, hey, here's my LinkedIn profile. Please add me on there. I'd love to stay connected after today. Now, there's some don'ts to networking too, and I've seen all of these happen. Don't interrupt existing conversations. There's nothing more frustrating when you're having a really good conversation with somebody and then someone randomly pops in and just saying, hey, I just wanted to say hi, how you doing? And then that completely derails what you might have been saying at that particular moment. So if it's possible, don't interrupt the existing conversation. But also don't monopolize a contact. And I put this picture of Obama at some sort of rally. I don't know what it is, but this is the exact sort of thing. If you're at an event and there's a speaker, there's usually like a rush of people that goes to that keynote at the end. And you want to make sure that you have the opportunity to at least introduce yourself quickly. You're not going to probably have a lot of time to talk to that individual because there's 30 other people who are in line. Just say your quick, hey, I'm XYZ. I work, in the community mental health system. I really thought your talk about mental health care reform is important. Here's my business card. I'd love to follow up with you. Would it be okay if I reach out to you in the next week to chat more? I know you're busy today. That's a really good way to quickly move through that conversation so other people still have that opportunity to make that initial conversation. Don't waste your own time. This one, it might be a little harsh sounding, but it happens where we're going to meet people and not have either that much in common, or you might be somewhere looking for a specific sort of resource and that person is not it, and you may find that out after a minute or two. It is perfectly okay to move the conversation along. You want to be polite, obviously, and find a way to step away, but a good way to do that is also if you know somebody who is in the room or that might be really good fit for that person to connect with, is make that introduction. Say, hey, Alan is here and he is our policy director. I think he'd be really great to talk about the initiatives that you're looking to do. Let me go grab him really quick, and I think you two should talk. And then you can move on to maybe whatever the next person that might be a good fit for. And I see, I will have to be taking questions in just a minute. I know I've been talking for a bit already. And then the last don't network speed date. So this is just going around to the room to try to maximize the amount of people you can talk to. So you're literally just kind of handing out business cards saying, hey, I'm Dwayne, this is what I do, interrupting circles, passing out your business cards, and just going to group to group to group to group. That's not a good strategy. You want to aim to have a few really good, meaningful conversations that you can bring back. Now, you don't want to spend all of your time with one person unless it turns into a really fantastic discussion, then you might. But you don't want to just speed through and not miss important details, because one of the really big pieces with networking is you want to make sure you understand what that person's skill is, what that person's resource and what their connections may be. So then when you do need something, you actually know who to reach out to. When you're going to conferences specifically, make sure you bring a business or networking card. If your business card doesn't already have your social media on it, it may not be appropriate for the type of job you're at. So you may or may not want to have it, but having a networking card is also a really good option. So that's going to have whatever social media platforms you feel comfortable sharing. It might be LinkedIn, it could be a Twitter, it could be Facebook. Having those profiles automatically linked onto your business card or networking card. At conferences, don't forget about the exhibitors, because sometimes that is some of the greatest ways to get information and resources to bring back to your agencies. A lot of exhibitors at conferences are willing to come to your agencies for free, to present on things, to offer resources, to come to your universities to talk about particular issues. And that's why they're there. They really want to get to know you. And if you are an exhibitor at an event, talk to the other exhibitors. I do that quite regularly when I have to go out for my work. And a lot of times I'm able to find really good services or resources from the other folks in the room and then bring that back to help build some partnerships. And then the last thing I'd say about conference tips is we are moving to a more and more tech conference age. So this is where we're seeing, we're getting rid of handouts at a lot of conferences. We're starting to see apps being used for registration, for scheduling, to have your presenter information for your handouts, but as well as networking. I know the Pennsylvania chapter at their annual event, as well as the national NASW, use an app, and you can stay connected because usually you can go and find profiles of other folks who are at that conference and their contact information, depending on how it's set up. You can also share photos and experiences, so you can see what other people are. If you're not able to go to every workshop, it's a really good way to see the whole scope of what's going on at the conference. While you're at conferences too, I also would just recommend not sitting with the same people at lunch all the time. I know sometimes that's a really good way to connect with folks who you might not have seen in a while, but if you have a few days at a conference, get outside the box and sit with some new folks, or bring a couple of your friends and join a different table. Now, if you're organizing a conference, have scheduled time for networking. We have those 10-minute breaks in between workshops, or 15 minutes. That's usually not that much time. Usually you run to the bathroom, you're trying to get your seat before the room fills up. Have some scheduled time, whether it's in the evening, a networking reception. If you can, use an app. It's a really good way to get people connected. It's also a good way to get younger social workers to your events. If you are tech savvy and have ways for people to immediately connect. Use a conference hashtag and a social media presence. I know this is a really good way to use volunteers. I always say, hey, we've got 5 volunteers who don't have a specific role for the day. What we're going to give you, we'd like you to just take pictures with your phone and tweet. So we just want you to tweet your experiences, go around and listen about what's going on. And for your exhibitors, I'm sure some of you have been at conferences where there are games. So you can do passport games, you can do prizes, lots of good ways to encourage people to get back into that exhibitor room. So I've just got a couple more slides before our first set of questions. But when we think about one way of networking as well, informational interviewing is a big piece of that. So these are just short meetings with somebody who usually is in a career that you're interested in that you don't have now, or maybe in a position that you're hoping to get one day, just to talk about their job. What it looks like to get to your position. What sort of training do you need to get this job? Do you know of anyone I should speak with if I wanted to move up into this sort of position or get this sort of job? So informational interviewing doesn't have the goal of getting an immediate job, but the goal is long-term to have, again, that network of people. So if you said, at 2 years from now, you may say, hey, I'm now interested in a director position, a supervisor or director position at this clinical institute. Oh, I can shoot. I met with Beth Kelly last year and did that informational interview. I'm going to just send her a quick email and say, hey, remember when we chatted last year? I just wanted to let you know I'm on the job market now. If you know of anything that's open, please let me know. I'd love to, work in this particular area. And then the last section about networking before we move to social media is on internal networking. Now, this is maybe the most important part of what I'm going to talk about today, because I don't think we do this very well in social work. So internal networking is how do we connect within our organizations beyond our normal job? And I can't tell you how many social workers I talk to that are burnt out at their jobs, that they don't have enough information about what's going on in other areas of the employment, especially if you're at a larger agency or a non-traditional job where you may be the only social worker. You may feel very isolated. So internal networking can be very, very valuable in creating a better company culture. So when we want to think about how well do you know the people you work with? I know here at NASW, I only have an office of 6 people, so we know each other pretty well, but you might be at a hospital or a community mental health where you have hundreds of other employees. And so there may be whole sections of the company that you never talk with folks. And you see unnecessarily conflict tend to arise or disconnects between management and new staff. And sometimes that internal networking can really help resolve some of those problems. And so when your internal networking within an agency, you really want to get to know your colleagues at a deeper level. You'll help build your brand, because if you say, hey, I'd like to do a rotating lunch once a week, I'm going to go and meet with a different person at my agency that I don't know, and I'm going to get to know them. One really interesting example when I was doing some research for this presentation that I found is there's a gentleman who works at a tech company, but he had a different lunch meeting every day. And what he would do is he created a whole website where he listed each lunch and what the person's skill set was that he met with. So, today I met with Jacqueline. If you need any help with, coding or electronic medical records, you need to reach out to her. And so what that did is after the company started to catch on, like, oh, wow, he's doing this, he have this really interesting idea. So the company then went and paid for weekly rounds of lunch, almost like lunch dates with their staff, where people would just get to know each other and the company would provide that fee. But there are so many social workers that I talk with that, and this might be you, that skip lunch, that just work through it, that never get out of their office or might be on the road. If you can, at least once a week or once every other week, set at least one lunch aside to make that new connection with somebody. So one easy way to start doing that is make a list of key players at that agency. So they may be people that you work with or don't work with, but have some decision-making power, or a resource that you might use at some point, and then go through that list. That can be your first few lunches. Talking up other folks' accomplishments at your work, and that can be personal or professional. If somebody has a baby or gets married or got a promotion or just did really well on a particular project, talking up those positive accomplishments at your job. Many agencies don't do a good job of talking that up. And utilizing your leaders. So, talking to your boss and say, hey, who do you think I should sit with for lunch today? Or is there somebody that I should talk to get to this next level on this particular project? Or I am doing these case notes and I have a question about XYZ. Who do you think I should talk to about that? One easy example to bring in is it's an exercise called the rock. One of the folks that I supervise, they have this at their agency where once a week they have a rock that they bring in and that gets passed around. One person gives the rock to somebody else who has been the rock for the agency that week. So they may have helped somebody with a project, they may have been doing some exemplary work. And so just another, it's not a very big thing, but it's a way for the whole team to see somebody get recognized. And then that individual has to pass it on the next time around. Now, you may have something similar to that in your work. And I think those positive affirmations at work, especially in a high stress burnout field like social work, can really help to build the company morale or the agency morale. So I know that was a bit, so I'm going to take a minute now for any questions around any of that stuff so far.
Yeah, we had just a couple of quick questions, I think, here. One from Kevin, and he was just asking, he often feels like networking can be very time consuming, which I think we can all relate with. What is a reasonable amount of time in a normal work week for an executive director to devote to networking?
That's a good question as an executive director. I would guess my first question would be like, what sort of agency and what's the expectation for that executive director? I know here at NASW, our executive director, I would say networking probably takes up 20% of her week, whether that's being parts of coalitions, attending conferences, things like that. And how big is your staff? If you're a small agency, you may not have that much time to dedicate, but I would say in terms of management, getting to know your staff, it's a pretty big role. Putting a percentage is going to be a little bit tough on it, but I would say you want to make sure that as management, do you know your staff? Do you feel like your agency is networked? And if you don't personally have the time for it, are there folks that work for you that have really good skill sets that may not be why they were hired to begin with, but that may be something that they're also passionate about? One of the things that I talk with students a lot who are graduating is, do you have Facebook and Twitter on your resume? And most of the time the answer is no, why would I have that on your resume? But for many of our agencies, our websites and our social media presence aren't good in social work. And so if you have someone who is already really good at building, Facebook campaigns or that have web development skills, some of those things can be translated into your agency where that may not be why they were brought on initially, but can really add that additional value into the company.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. He did just happen to follow up with that as well, just to say that we are an service organization. We have 110 full-time staff. I feel I know the staff really well, but external networking can take a life of its own. Yeah, which we definitely understand. I like your idea about delegating networking assignments.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of like specifically with an AIDS organization, I would maybe, if you don't already have, if you're an agency of 100, if you have one, even if one of your staff is your social media staff, that's a really good way, or your community relations staff, maybe that's a better way to put it. That person would be in charge of making sure that you have an online presence, that they may be setting up meetings with particular coalitions that you want to be a part of, and making sure that that all of your staff are aware of different opportunities, because while you may not have the time to go to a particular meeting, you may have another staff person that you're like, you know what, I think Betsy is going to be a really good fit for this meeting, and I think this coalition would help the work that they may be doing in the role as like, case manager, or an educational trainer, whatever it might be. So yeah, utilizing those other staff, sometimes, especially in a management role, that delegation piece is huge.
Awesome. Yeah, another question here. Dwayne, I am very new to Pittsburgh, PA. I'm currently looking for a job. I recently attended a CEU opportunity and met two wonderful connections. I don't have a business card, so I provided my information on a sticky note to one contact who is also very new to Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, one contact didn't have her information and she was in a rush to leave, so she couldn't get any information from her. I feel like she could be a great contact and don't want to miss the opportunity to build a professional circle. Is it appropriate for me to contact the CEU organizer so I may follow up, or is that creepy?
So I would first probably go to LinkedIn and seeing if you know their name, at least finding out if they're on, because that's a professional networking site. So that's a really good way to then send a message before you try to add them. Say, hey, we met at this conference or this event. I didn't get a chance to exchange contact information from you, but I really liked our conversation on this. I'd like to connect and chat more. Here's my contact information, as well as I'm going to go ahead and add you on here. I think that's a good way. I would say in general, don't ask your conference organizers for contact information unless it's a speaker. If it's a speaker, usually they have given their permission for their contact information to give it out. But if it's just a general attendee, yeah, I would say probably stick away from that.
Great, yeah. I think you mentioned CRISP earlier. Can you explain what that is as an organization?
Yeah, CRISP is the Congressional Research Institute for Social Policy. So they're a group out of DC that specifically works with, they're a social work organization that works specifically on political issues. So they are a fairly small organization, and a few years old now, but they do a lot of lobbying and educational work around social work and politics and social work and legislative advocacy.
Cool. Yeah. Melissa asked also, what would you put on a networking card? She followed up just saying she's in her second year at Widener Online. She secured a first filed placement, but want to look ahead to connecting with possible second placements. And just kind of what would you put on a networking card in that situation?
So if you're not in the field yet, what you might want to do, obviously you want your contact information, put those links to your profile. So your LinkedIn, if you have Twitter and Facebook that are professional looking and you're comfortable with adding new contacts, those are good to add on there. But you can also put just a small summary. You could put MSW student interested in gerontology specific to working with veterans, seeking network, or kind of like in most resumes that has gotten rid of the objective statement, but you can have at least a short little, almost like a bio about yourself on your networking card. And you can keep it basic. for networking cards too, it's okay to have a picture because hopefully you've met those people in person, and that's a good way. As long as you have a professional photo, don't take a selfie and put that on there. But if you've met them in person, so it's okay to put that picture on there, and that's a good way for them to remember who it was. I know I have a whole stack of business cards on my desk, and it's like, well, I kind of remember who some of these folks were, but some of them, you meet so many people sometimes that if you didn't take good notes, that sometimes you forget.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, so that's it for the questions. I'll just add to Teresa added in here. I often feel intimidated by the idea of networking, but as Dwayne is talking, I'm realizing that I network all the time. I wasn't thinking of more informal interactions as networking, and this webinar has helped kind of expand that view. So thank you, Teresa. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And the informal is sometimes more important than the formal networking. And I think when we think of the formalized, it can be very anxiety provoking and hard to get that sort of work done. But I'm going to go ahead and move on. I'm going to skip out the second poll question just because I know I'm already running a little bit late on time. So in terms of digital networking, so this is your social media online presence. We're in 2017. It's pretty important that you have some sort of online presence at this point. And I know a lot of folks don't, but if you if you're really serious about building a network, this is the way that we're just at now. So what you want to do first is Google yourself. If you have not already done this, you should do this today because you just want to make sure that what is out there about you is accurate and what you want people to know. There may be something that you find that you Google yourself and it's like, oh, this was from 15 years ago. I'd rather this profile not be up. It may not be bad, but it may not be how you want to represent yourself today with your current professional identity. So there are ways to petition Google to remove particular information, or going back to whoever the original host of that content is saying, hey, would you mind removing this? I'm not interested in having this up online anymore. And you can sign up for what's called Google Reader, and that will just give you an alert anytime a story is posted that has your name associated with it. And that's a good way to just continually check in to make sure that what's online is correct information. And be consistent. So make sure that your messaging and how you're portraying yourself is the same across platforms. So the main two that folks use for social media, and this is individual and for organizations, is Facebook and Twitter. So Facebook, there's over 1 billion people on there now. Some of the really key things for Facebook networking is making sure you're tagging groups and individuals. So if you are posting an article on secondary trauma and 5 people who that's kind of their passion area, tag them in that article. And all you have to do to tag somebody is hit the @ symbol and then start typing their name and it should pop up. Images, memes, and videos, if you are, especially for organizations, if you're wanting to get a lot of people to view your profile and information, you almost always want to have an image or a video. That's going to increase the view count. And sometimes if you want to include like I wouldn't say non-professional, but more lighthearted images, those sometimes can get the most views. So, if you wanted to have like a cat video, everyone loves the animal videos for whatever reason. And so sometimes those are good ways to get lighthearted posts to your pages, as well as if you give out prizes. People always like free stuff. So if you can add a prize to, say you're doing a poll or a question and you say, we're going to give a t-shirt out for somebody who shares and likes this post. That's a really good way to start sharing your information. Be conscious of who you friend, because remember, once they're in your profile, they have access to everything that you've posted, depending on what your privacy settings are. And you definitely want to make sure you've checked your privacy settings. So if somebody just Googles your name again, do you have your privacy set so everyone can see all your photos, all your posts, or is it set for just your friends? So you can go to the Facebook settings to check that. With Twitter, works pretty similarly to Facebook. You just get less amount of words. It's maxed out at 140 characters for most of us. Use hashtags. So that's the number symbol. It was funny. I posted something on the NASW Michigan page, and my executive director came and said, "Dwayne, why do you have all those number symbols after on our Facebook page. It's like, oh, Max, nope, those are hashtags. So hashtags could be something like, in Michigan, we use MI social work, hashtag MI social work, so Michigan social work. So anytime we host an event, that's our traditional hashtag that we use. So if somebody goes on Twitter and puts in the search engine hashtag MI social work, any post that includes that will show up. Make sure anything that you post on Facebook or on Twitter is reliable sources. You know, there's a lot of stuff out there now about fake news, so just be very careful about what you share on those platforms. And you can link your Facebook and your Twitter pages so they are tied together. So if you post something on Facebook, it automatically posts on Twitter and vice versa. So that's a really good way, especially for agencies who may not have a lot of time and resources for social media, to make sure both platforms are being utilized. There are social work Twitter chats happening at the national and state levels. There's a group that does weekly chats around macro social work. They use the hashtag macroSW. NASW National does a series of Twitter chats. The next one's coming up in December on the technology standards and the code of ethics. So those are usually an hour, or well, that one's a half an hour. But if you follow that hashtag, or if you want to participate in those Twitter chats, you just go on your own personal Twitter and you use that hashtag, and then you'll be connected to anybody who is communicating along the lines. There are a couple handouts for today, and then in the PowerPoint, which is also a handout, there's a lot of links that just make sure you check out. Like this one has the best Twitter chats for mental health professionals. I've talked a bit about LinkedIn today, so I'm going to skip over that. But there are tons of social media options, and depending on what sort of work that you're doing and the setting that you're in, you may need to know about some of these more than others. So do you do Pinterest? So that's a lot of photos. So I know with Pinterest, there's a lot of really good stuff for clinical social workers in terms of examples of intake forms and things like that. YouTube is a very underutilized social work, I think, in social work. We have a few folks like Brene Brown who uses YouTube. Joe Court here in Michigan, who does sex therapy, uses YouTube for informational purposes. But there are some platforms like that I think if social workers got on that bandwagon, there'd be a market to really be effective change agents. All right, so I know we're getting near the end of our time for today, so I just want to quickly switch over to some of the ethical considerations. And I'll just go through this pretty quickly because hopefully everyone on this call is familiar with our code of ethics. However, we did just have some changes added, and almost all the changes are in regards to technology. And so when we're thinking about networking, how does technology and specifically social media impact the work that we do, and how do we have to think about ethics? So just in our purpose, a new section was added that says social workers should keep appraised of emerging technological advancements that may be used in social work practice and how various ethical standards apply to them. There's a few specific sections that I think are going to be important for us to know about. Conflict of interest. So, do you Facebook your client? Do you allow your clients to find you on LinkedIn? If there is ever a potential for a conflict of interest, you want to not go through that. You don't want to do that. Now, what some social workers and professionals will do is they'll set up a second account that will just be for their professional contacts. So you may set up your own, if you have a private practice, for instance, you may set up a private practice Facebook page, and you say to your clients, if you're interested, you can follow my Facebook page where I provide resources, additional training. There's my contact information on there, but I don't allow clients to add me on my personal Facebook page. As you can see in section 8, social workers should avoid accepting requests from or engaging in personal relationships with clients on social networking sites or electronic media to prevent boundary confusion. Be very careful what you do on social media, because if you are very political or you have some things on social media that may conflict with a treatment that you're doing with a client, or your client might be triggered by something that they see, and it's because of something that you've had on your social media, that could cause very problematic things with your relationship with them and could eventually lead to some sort of a complaint filed against your license. We haven't really seen that yet with social media, but I would guess over time that's going to be something that's going to become more and more. In terms of privacy, if your clients are on social media, you don't want to solicit information about your clients by Googling them unless it's emergency situations. So be very careful of what your policy is, and what NASW recommends is that your agency has a specific social media policy. So do you have something that you have your client sign on their initial intake that says, we will not search for you on social media or online presence unless it's for emergency purposes. But we know that our clients are probably going to Google us. I mean, that's may have been how they found your name. If they were looking for a therapist and wanted to find somebody in their area, they just might have Googled therapist in, Pittsburgh, and your name popped up as the #1 thing. And so then they might have found your name and Google that and see what comes up. So again, that's why you want to make sure whatever you have on your online presence is accurate and what you'd like people to see. I think the respect for colleagues is a very interesting one. Social workers should avoid unwarranted negative criticisms of colleagues in verbal, written, and electronic communications with clients or with other professionals. So be very careful what you say about other social workers online, by coworkers. If you had a dispute with somebody, that can all come back to you if you have it out there. And so just be very, very cautious of your ethical obligations and your online presence, because sometimes you just want to be very careful that there is not a conflict on there. And then my last slide that I just wanted to bring up, I know I'm out of time for today, but how to avoid burnout in networking, because I know this is always a problem for folks who have to kind of be on all the time for their job, and I would guess for executive directors, you are feeling this too, but don't always be on. You need to make sure that you have that off switch to say, and know yourself. I know for me, if I have to go into a conference for 3 days, I'm going to be pretty wiped out after that. So do you need to take a day off after that? Do you need to make sure that in the evenings you're resting in your hotel room instead of going down to the networking event? Be very careful about yourself, because it is taxing to be talking to people, to be making new connections, to be putting yourself out there all the time. Be aware of your colleagues. This is a very important one for internal networking. So if you see that a lot of your staff are being burnt out, is part of it because they're not communicating well with other parts of their team or other departments, and maybe having more opportunities for collaboration and kind of low-key networking, whether it's lunches or whatever it might help some of those disputes that are going on at your agency. And then lastly, giving yourself time to process is a big part of social work. We process everything. But after you attend an event or make a new connection, really take some time to think about, okay, this is what happened today. This is the new folks that I met. This is where I really think it would be helpful to have those connections fit into these projects I'm working on or these coalitions I'm building. And then lastly, doing that follow-up. I think there's nothing more frustrating with networking is when you reach out to somebody and they don't reach out back. And that does happen. People are busy. You may not get the response you want, but making sure that you have a continued follow-up if there really is a connection that you want to have long-term. And I think for social workers, sometimes in our day-to-day world, it's taking that extra time. We may not have a lot of extra time, but it's really important to make that connection after that initial contact. So saying, I was really excited to talk to you today. Thank you for being the keynote speaker at the LEAD conference this year. I was really interested to hear your story about human trafficking. I'd love to find out more ways to get involved. Do you just have some time that we could talk in the next couple of weeks? I'm happy to come to your office or take you out for a coffee. And I think most times people are going to be really receptive to that. Folks want to be praised. I mean, I think we have that innate, when somebody recognizes something in us or an expertise, we'd love to hear that. And so most folks, when I reach out to them and have found they're really receptive to, or at least honest, saying, you know, I am super swamped right now, but if you can reach out to me after the first of the year, I think that we can definitely get something set up. And so be honest too, if that's you, you may not have any time in the next couple of weeks. Just say, hey, it was great meeting you. Yeah, I'm really swamped right now, but I'd love to chat with you. Would you reach back out, you know, in a couple weeks? So I have set a few resources in here for you, as well as some references. So definitely check some of these out. If you don't have a Facebook page or a Twitter page or a LinkedIn page, there's some cheat sheets on how to do that on these links that I think are be really helpful. Feel free to reach out to me either on LinkedIn, or you can email me at any time as well. And then I just wanted to, I'll leave folks with these first few steps. You know, look what's coming up on your calendar. Make sure that you've got those business cards supply ready. If you are a student, check with your university. A lot of times they'll pay for a first round of business cards for you. Google yourself, check your social media pages, and one really easy step is to connect to folks you already know in your life that might be working on maybe a similar project. Say, hey, Dwayne, or whoever, I just attended this training on networking. I was thinking about this project that you were working on. I think you would be a really good fit to work with John here. I want to connect you to. Here's your contact information. I'd love to set up a time to have lunch with the three of us if you're free. So again, just making that initial contact, and then it'll go from there. So I know I'm already out of time, so thank you for all of you who have stuck around the call. If there are questions, I will stick on, but I know some of you have to probably get back to work.